Angel Eduardo. Am I saying it right?
Yeah, you are.
Oh my God, I had this moment of terrifying, crippling fear that I got your name wrong because you had a
No,
hesitation there. I'm like, do I correct her?
no,
Well,
not at all. Yeah, it's funny because people always ask me, "Is it angel or angel?" And I always
oh,
just say, "Depends what language you're speaking." In Spanish, it's angel, and in English, it's
um,
angel. I
yeah,
have
I'm
the
not going to
benefit
attempt.
of, yeah, I have the benefit of my name can be spoken in multiple languages because there's a word for it. So I just take that, whatever that is.
Well, I am glad to have you with me, joining me today, and we're going to have an interesting conversation, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to get a little bit of background on you. I mean, I know a fair bit about you, but I think some of the people listening in might not have the full story. But I think we first started interacting, and I think the star manning. Uh, Theory, or whatever you want to
Mm-hmm.
call it, is what caught my eye, and I think we had a lot of alignment in our philosophies as to how we communicate and have kind of kumbaya kind of way, but make the world better
Right.
and
Yeah.
have better discourse. But I'd love
Mm-hmm.
to get a little bit of a background on you, and I know you work at Fire now, so just tell me a little
Right.
bit about your journey and where you're heading as well.
Well, I'm a writer and musician and visual artist. I do all kinds of stuff. Someone gave me really good advice when I was young, which is that anything you have an inkling of interest or skill in, you should just try to pursue it. And so I took that really literally, and I started taking photographs and I started learning about graphic design and things like that. And so now I have all these different things that I do, which hopefully makes me useful in various contexts. Um, I'm from the New York City area. I grew up in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, right over the George Washington Bridge. So I spent a lot of time in New York City. I live in New York City now, and I was at FAIR, the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, for about a year, and I just recently jumped to FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. So two mouthfuls, four-letter organizations starting with an F, and yeah, just trying my best to contribute sane commentary and insight into the discourse as best I can.
What attracts you towards those kinds of organizations? Because they're sort of not quite in the mainstream, not quite outside of the mainstream in terms of the
Mm,
narratives, in terms of finding these sane conversations. What gets you in
yeah,
there?
I kind of fell into it, I guess. Someone mentioned to me one time when I was looking for work. I'm going, have you ever considered nonprofits? You seem like you should be in the nonprofit world. And I was like, fuck you, dude. And
I'm a
and
capitalist, damn it.
right. I was like, so you want me to make no money, dude? I'm already not making money.
Yeah,
I'm
you're
a
an artist.
musician. Yeah, I'm a musician whose backup plan was writing. Like,
Yeah,
you know.
that doesn't.
Uh, so yeah, not smart. But I started just writing op-eds, for Newsweek and Aereo and a couple of other places, just talking about the madness I was seeing and just trying to contribute. And I just have this, I don't know, I guess a compulsion. Like I see people not making sense, not using their heads as far as I'm concerned, or getting something very wrong that is consequential. And I want to contribute to that discourse in a positive way and kind of help people course correct or kind of share my own insights and perspective and how I ended up where I ended up. And then, yeah, Fair kind of got wind of what I was doing and they invited me to come by and work with them. And so I did. And now I'm with Fire, doing free speech advocacy, which is super important to me. So,
You
yeah.
said you said you wanted to point out sort of the have a discourse about the madness that you were seeing. What
Mm.
is the madness that you were seeing?
Uh,
In
it's a
5 words
lot.
or less. Just
There
kidding.
are there are a lot of manifestations of it, but I think that if I had to reduce it to one thing, it would be people are unwilling and unable to talk to each other. to actually communicate. That seems to be the core of what all the problems are. All the problems stem from an inability to communicate and I guess to understand. An unwillingness and an inability to communicate and understand uh, people who are not like them.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
a big reason as to why I connected with and follow your work is because I see even just the way you just described this phenomenon is very
Mm-hmm.
different from how a lot of people would. There's a lot of discourse that I think turns extremely negative and I think quite unproductive. So the
Right.
words that tend to be used, and I'm sure you're familiar with them, are things like wokeness and other kinds
Mm-hmm.
of language. And I think the people who see, or cancel culture, and I think that the people who see these phenomena arise in our culture have a tendency to sort of get very angry. And as an opposition to these forces that they're seeing out in the world, they almost like they go the other way and they become more polarized and in opposition to them, and they almost become this extreme that's the extreme that they were fighting against, just kind of on the other side of things.
Yep.
And that's what I
Yep.
liked about your approach. Are you
Uh-huh.
seeing the same thing I'm seeing?
Oh yeah, I always say if the horseshoe fits, like that's what everyone is doing, is equal and opposite reactions to the thing that they have justifiable and understandable concerns about. But then they just create something that other people have justifiable and understandable concerns about. So it's just goes round and round, and we don't make much progress because we're all so hyper focused on just defeating each other. I just
Yeah.
that seems like a waste of time, time and energy.
Yeah, and I think it's so easy to sort of become to kind of react, to become reactive to these things that you're seeing in the world because you maybe get angry,
Mm-hmm.
frustrated. And, you know, in some cases, some of these things have destroyed lives. So I can see why people have these frustrations. I mean, I've had some of these experiences myself, so I certainly can understand. I think there's almost like a trauma that happens. And so, as a reaction to that trauma, I think there is that breakdown in how
Mm-hmm.
people deal with it. But at the same time, I kind of look at it, and the more I've been aware of observing people and their reaction, I've realized how much this is hurting us because it's like people just kind of yelling at each other and failing to understand. And I've tried to sort of go out of my way lately to ask people who might with whom I might not agree on certain things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's some people who will see, oh, this person has blue hair, or they have pronouns in their bio, or something like that,
Yep.
and they're not worth speaking to, and they're just dismissed, or being, or worse, you know, people that they
Yeah.
get mocked, or people are rude to them. And I
Mm-hmm.
started sort of being, first of all, I ignore the fact their bios, so I will judge them based on their how they speak to me. And
Mm-hmm.
then the other thing is I might ask them, you know, why do you do this? Why do you do that? And just politely and out of curiosity, not judgment. And sometimes the
Right.
answers have been surprising. And sometimes people are completely willing to have an open conversation. And I think often people assume that they're not, that they're going to
Mm-hmm.
attack you. And I think
Mm-hmm.
what we as a society need to do is move away from these assumptions and open with more curiosity. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
I totally agree. Yeah. I spend a lot of time encouraging people not to make sweeping generalizations, sweeping assumptions. I just released this piece for Quillette about how the word woke is kind of it's just a waste of time at this point invoking it because whatever your conception of it is almost certainly not going to be the other person's conception of it, especially if you're disagreeing about something. And you're just going to waste all this time arguing about what woke is and is not and whether the other person is woke. And it's just you might as well just get to what's the actual thing you're trying to talk about because it's easier to describe that and it's easier to address that than it is to try to box somebody in. Um, And, you know, people's responses to that have been either missing my point or proving it,
Mm.
you know, kind of saying, like, no, all these people need to be named and they believe this. I know that this is a correct definition. And I'm like, okay, like, that's great that you have a definition. I mean, even I can have a definition of it. It's about whether the other person shares it and understands what you're talking about, or if you're misfiring, right? Because I've been called woke. I don't consider myself woke, but I've been called woke because there are certain points where I may sound woke to somebody. But I've also been called anti woke because there are certain points where I sound anti woke to people. It just depends. So, you know, I'm somebody for whom categories have never worked, right? Like I never quite fit into anybody's boxes. And that was a frustrating thing, a difficult thing for me growing up in particular. But now it's kind of cool because now it's like, well, you're going to have to just ask me questions and get to know who I actually am instead of making all these assumptions. Because every time you do, you're wrong, you know? So,
Uh, Yeah, well, I think you bring up a very something I've run into as well, a really critical
mm-hmm.
point. I also think that it's so important to just be very specific instead of putting people in these categories. And I
Right.
have this word misappropriation series that you might have
Yes.
come across. Yeah, and I did
Yeah, I
do the
saw it.
word woke, and I think it helps because I think people are confused. And the reason I defined it as, okay, this was the definition in the past, this is how people are using it today. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I've recently posted about groomer, which has been a word that has been bothering me
Yeah.
because and you could see from the responses, and people really got mad at me for kind of attacking their
Yeah.
holy grail word. But you can see from the responses how people were using it in vastly different ways, right? For
Mm-hmm.
anything from cases of grooming where, you know, we're talking about kidnapping kids and sexually assaulting them,
Right.
to like real cases of that. And they were upset that I wouldn't, you know, that I'm essentially saying, oh, don't use that word, to
Right.
where I'm not saying that, because that's pretty
Yeah.
specific to that case,
Right.
to basically, you know, teachers saying, you know, I have a husband and I'm, you know, and I'm a
Right.
male or something
Right.
like that, right? Where it's a
Right.
completely
I'm
different
gay. That's
situation. I'm
grooming.
gay.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Yeah. I'm
grooming.
gay is
Yeah,
grooming. That's
yeah,
crazy. Yeah. I remember the movie Lightyear, and I remember before I saw it, there was all this hubbub about this lesbian kiss in the movie, and people were freaking out about it and making all these crazy arguments. And then I went and saw the movie, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was cool. And I walked out and I was like, oh man, I guess all the controversy, they must have cut that scene because I didn't see
mm,
it. And then my someone showed me it, and I was like, oh wait, I did see that scene. Literally, I blinked and I missed it. I
right.
literally blinked and missed it. That was it. Right? It was literally just, oh hi honey, I'm home, kiss, and it was the most normal and innocuous thing in the world. And the only thing that would cause you to think that that was in some way sexualized or inappropriate is if you just believe that by default any lesbian kiss is like overtly sexual automatically, just by
Yeah.
dint of it being lesbian. Like there would be no compunction about it if it was a man and a woman,
I
but
mean,
because
there
it
are
was two women,
people,
like it crazy.
yeah. I mean, there are people who constantly repeat that a teacher shouldn't have any personal conversations with kids, and that's grooming, like sharing anything about their lives. And
Mm-hmm.
I think about that. I'm like, well, so you want robots to teach your children? I mean, that
Yeah.
was never the case. I mean, there's such an extreme overreaction in many cases where
Mm-hmm.
specificity could kind of solve that. If you specify the very nature of the issue you're having,
Mm-hmm.
I think we can have a conversation about it. It will bring along far more people. It would be less divisive. It would be less polarizing, less
Right.
political, and we can actually maybe attempt to take a stab at solving the issue. But this idea that,
Yeah.
okay, a teacher can't even, I taught high school during the pandemic, actually, for briefly. I taught university classes as well. And I mean, well, that's different because they're adults, but with kids, I mean, part of relating, I mean, I don't know, would they call me a groomer? I mean, I wasn't sharing my personal life, like my dating history or my,
Right.
sexuality. No, but, I might
Hmm.
share my interests or, oh, I had a, bad day, or I might share a story of being bullied because by relating that, it gives the kids some sense of like how to go through something themselves. And the best teachers that I've had were teachers who did relate, and they changed my life.
Hmm.
They've empowered me. They've changed the course of my life. And the teachers that didn't have any personal connections are the teachers that I don't remember their names and I felt
Hmm.
uncared for. So there is,
Hmm.
there's boundaries, there's healthy boundaries,
Right.
100%.
Hmm.
There's certainly things that teachers should not be sharing. But
Right.
when you make it such an obscene extreme where, like, no, all you should stick to is, math, and that is, I think that is ridiculous and absurd and an
Yeah.
overreaction. Instead
Yeah.
of being very specific, and again, it's because you're like using these generalized terms,
Right.
and instead of
Exactly.
being specific, okay, I have an issue with, you know this is inappropriate for this grade level. Maybe you shouldn't
Hmm.
have nudity in the books, or graphic sexual depictions of this.
Right.
uh,
Right.
and that's fine, that's appropriate. I can understand that. We can have a conversation,
Hmm.
and we can discuss that. And I think you'd have a lot more parents on, and this is why it's become this such a, I think, a right wing versus left wing issue.
Right.
Uh, and it really shouldn't be. It's
Yeah.
like a parent issue, it's a kid's issue.
It's bizarre. It's bizarre because, like, getting back to the horseshoe thing, like, I don't think people realize, and I think part of the reason they don't realize it is because they maintain themselves at this distance to the topic itself through the use of these terms, right? Like, they just dissociate themselves from those terms, and they say that's not me. But prayer in schools and divulging, personal information about yourself as a teacher, like, those are in some ways a similar area, right? Like, if a teacher just says, "Oh, my husband and I went to uh, Washington D.C. last week, and we learned about the Washington Monument and blah blah blah," and that's just a way for the teacher to get into that sort of American history, right? Connecting it on a personal level. Uh, that's that to me is like, I don't, like, just knowing that your teacher goes to church, right?
Yeah.
It's not your teacher bringing it in and saying we all have to pray now, right? But the same people who are complaining about, this grooming thing because a teacher just acknowledges that they're gay, a lot of them would have no problem with literally prayer in schools, and that's such a far more egregious trespass, in terms of what the boundaries, right? Because there's an imposition there, but they don't see it that way because it's, nobody's politics are ever their politics, right? It's just the way it is. But everyone else's politics are their politics, right? So it's, you're imposing your politics onto me, but I'm never imposing my politics onto anybody. This is just the way things are supposed to be, right? Like, it's just kind of a fish don't know they're wet thing.
It's like freedom of speech too. It's something that
Yeah.
has become this thing that's very like, has been adapted more by the right, and quote unquote right. I kind of hate the wings and the
Yep.
directions and compasses, but just for ease of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in the past, it's been sort of considered more the baby of the left, and the right was supposedly censoring everything. And
Yeah.
now it's like, but at the same time, as I've kind of gotten to know, the right, quote unquote, more, come to realize, well, no, that's not really true. I mean, they might say that they don't like to censor, but there's certainly certain things that they feel justified in censoring. They just think it's
Yeah.
justifiable, and they
Exactly.
just don't maybe have the full power the same way that the left currently has the power. So I think
Mm-hmm.
everybody wants to censor. That's a compulsion that they have, and it's
Oh yeah.
just a matter of who currently has the power to do so. So I
Yep.
have no reluctance to say that either one of them are completely willing to engage in censorship because they feel it's
Yeah.
morally justified. It's just a matter of, can they do it?
Mm-hmm. Different targets and different justifications, but it's the same impulse. It's my moral and social perspective is superior and should dominate yours.
Yeah.
Uh, and you know, I mean, I'm not like a relativist, right? I believe in objective moral truth. I believe that there are such things as right and wrong, but how we go about doing this stuff, we have to be careful. Like, there's so much of a thing of, you know, when our guy is in charge, we're just going to give him as much power as possible. And then they don't really think about, well, when the next guy is in charge and it's not your guy, he's going to have all those same powers. Do you really want people to have those kinds of powers without knowing what they're going to do? You know, like, it seems like people just don't think about that. You know,
Yeah,
everybody
no one
wants the
thinks about
baton.
that.
Right.
I know
Everybody
just
wants the
today.
baton, but nobody wants to be hit with it. But if there's a
Yeah.
baton, someone's getting hit. You know what I mean? So it's like, maybe we just shouldn't have one. You know what
I
I mean?
know. Just today, I was looking at the some people were posting about the AI ChatGPT and how they
Mm.
were trying to get it to write positive things about the different presidents. So Biden, or actually, well, not president. That was a slip. So Trump, Biden, but also DeSantis, and
uh,
the Chat GPT kind of refused to write it for some people, anyways. It refused to write one for Trump completely. It wrote a
wow.
glowing one for Biden, and for DeSantis, some people had a hard time, and it said because he said hateful things. That's what the Chat GPT said. So they don't want to spread
Wow.
disinformation or something like that. And so and then people who hate DeSantis and Trump, they said, well, doesn't the explanation make sense? I said, well, okay, what, it doesn't matter. I could agree with you, but there are people
Mm-hmm.
who do disagree. And like you said, I do believe also in an objective, in a sort of a truth and a right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it is like, who gets to decide that? So I do think I'm right, but at the same time, so does the other guy.
Yeah.
So this
Right.
idea, and right now, okay, so whoever programmed, controls that Chat GPT is thinks this, and that's how they've sort of programmed it or fed it that content.
Mm-hmm.
um if it was the other guy, who thinks, by lots of people criticize Biden, think he's, I don't want to say, but terrible things, that might not have sufficient evidence.
Uh-huh.
um they believe that wholeheartedly. What if they programmed the Chat GPT to show that? So
Mm-hmm.
that's why we cannot have these kinds of modes of, I guess, censorship or bias put in place.
Mm-hmm.
And people kind of don't see that oftentimes, because
Yeah.
when it serves their side.
Mm-hmm. It's an easy thing to fall into. You know, it's the thing that works for me, the thing that makes me feel comfortable, the thing that edifies my intuitions and my instincts on things, which is the result of kind of just your temperament and your experiences and your education. Like, all those things sort of create this code that you're operating. You know, your this operating system that you're using, and you don't really pay attention to that fact that if you lived in a different place, if you grew up in a different way with different people around you telling you different things, experiencing different things, you would have a different perspective. And that's why other people have different perspectives because nobody has lived your life exactly. You know, and that but
Right.
that's the beauty of it, right? Because I think I'm right. I try my best. I try my best to make sense, to be logical and reasonable and to listen to people, but I know that I'm wrong. I know that there's stuff that I'm wrong about right now, and I know that I've been wrong a ton before. And the only way to really figure that out is to kind of throw it out there and let people respond to it. And then I kind of get their perspectives. I can feed that into my own algorithm or whatever, and work things out and try my best to be honest. But that's an uncomfortable thing. That's a difficult thing. And it takes a certain kind of temperament, I guess, to naturally be that way, which I am. I love thinking about thinking. You know, I
Hmm.
love deconstructing myself and my own thoughts. I love doing that. I love analyzing, like, what's going on here? Why do I feel this way? But that's not
Well, you're
necessarily,
slowing down the emotion. You're slowing down the
yeah, I
emotion,
mean,
and yeah.
that's not, that's just not necessarily what people like to do for fun. It's literally what I like to do for fun. So
Yeah, we
I
probably
get it.
share that aspect, and I think
Mm,
there's a stoic kind of detachment that allows us to maybe be able to
mm,
go that way, and maybe sometimes that can come across as sort of this uh, that detachment. I think
mm-hmm,
people don't always like it. I mean, I was accused recently, I think, of because I asked people to sort of slow things down in the emotion side, because I don't think you can make decisions out of emotion. It's not because I don't value emotion. And emotion can be a signal.
mm-hmm.
It can be important, and you know, you have to recognize emotion, and we are human, and I'm very
Right.
emotional, actually. I feel
Yeah.
things very deeply. I'm incredibly emotional. But when it comes to making
Mm-hmm,
decisions and thinking things through, I think you have to do it with logic, and you have to do it with facts. And I do find that people get very mad at me. But you can't say
mm-hmm.
something is without having some backing to it. So this
Right.
kind of critical thinking aspect, I think, is crucial. And I think people kind of think from their emotions a lot, but you
Yeah.
can't. I think you need evidence. And in the absence of
Yes.
evidence, you can't say something is. It doesn't, I
Mm-hmm.
understand you may have a hunch. I may have a hunch. I might have the same gut feeling that you, but I'm not going to say that thing because I don't have the evidence to confirm it.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
we live in a society that speaks from emotion more than it speaks from facts and logic.
Yeah. I mean, I used to be, well, I was called a robot a lot. So I have been,
Yeah.
I have been called a robot a lot because I try my best to be objective and dispassionate when I'm trying to figure something out. But that's also a temperament, which means it's
Yeah.
also a kind of emotional way. Like, it's your emotion. You know, your emotion is doubt and hesitancy. You know, and that
Mm.
gives you the opportunity to not freak out or whatever. But it's still kind of a temperament thing, and other people are kind of wired in a more fiery way, so it's not as conducive, right? But we're all acting emotionally, and we rationalize after the fact. You know, even when we are the type of person who's very logical and analytical, right? That's still kind of just happening, and then we just go backwards and say, oh well, we're trying to be dispassionate, we're trying to figure things out with evidence. And that's what I mean about outsourcing, right? That's why it's so important to put things out there and accept feedback, because there's just no way you yourself can cover everything. You can't see every angle and you can't understand every perspective, but there's all these people around you who can help. There's all these people who can, you know, give their perspective. Doesn't mean they're right either. You could both be wrong, but there's
Yeah.
something about receiving those different perspectives and incorporating it into your own, using it to inform your own, that allows you to not negate your emotional responses to things, but learn how to kind of temper them, right? I used to say all the time that, like, the heart is like a wild horse and the mind is like the reins. And without both working together, you're not going to get anywhere, right? You just have this crazy horse that you can't get on. And then without it, you have this, you know, these reins that you can't attach to the horse, and you're not getting anywhere. You know, you're not getting anywhere. So either way, you need both those things working together in order to move forward. Like, it's important to feel those emotions and understand where they're coming from and contextualize them properly, and then sort of guide them in the right direction.
Yeah. And you kind of get crowd wisdom when you listen to people, as I call it, because
Yeah.
um, many minds better than one. Well, sometimes.
You get crowd madness too.
You
It's
do.
both.
You do get crowd
So
madness, which
yeah,
there's a
you have to be
whole
careful.
field of study there. But yeah, but I do think, I mean, not, and again, I don't want to completely discount emotion, because I do think
Hmm.
emotion is kind of your gut, and your gut is a
Yeah,
signal.
exactly.
Yeah, because I think your brain is, well, I know that your brain is something that is very powerful, and it is able to calculate a lot very quickly to an extent that you are not even capable of knowing sometimes. So sometimes that signal is really a very sophisticated calculation. So
Yeah.
somebody might be onto something, and which is why, I think discounting those emotions is maybe a bad idea altogether.
Hmm.
But I think also when we're talking about things that are happening or making accusations, I
Right.
think things like that, I do like to stray on the side of fact. And when people feel attacked, when they're sort of questioned, especially when they're questioned in polite ways, I can
Hmm.
see why they might feel more uncomfortable or upset when
Right.
somebody comes at them with bad faith or hostility. That's a bit of a
Of course.
different thing. But if you're polite, I think often it's because they're insecure about their own belief. And
Mm.
so they know that their certainty is actually less than they think. And so they're more afraid of those
Hmm.
questions and having their beliefs challenged, and therefore they get more emotional about
That's part
that.
of it. That's part of
Yeah.
it for sure.
What's the other
There's
part?
also, I think that people identify with their beliefs and opinions in a way where in a way that I think is unhealthy, which is,
Yeah.
I'm not just someone who believes X, I am X. That X is me. And when you come and challenge or question X, you're challenging and questioning me as a person, my identity, my conception of myself. And so that's where you're going to get a lot of really hostile pushback as well, just because, you're deconstructing the person I have built around this thing by questioning this thing. This happens a lot with religion, right? I used to piss people off
Mm-hmm.
constantly by, needling them about their religious beliefs or customs and things because it didn't make sense to me. And I'm like, but don't you see how this is this? And, I wasn't attacking them, but they felt attacked personally, right? I was just talking about the thing they were saying or the thing they believed. But that thing they believed is so part and parcel to who they are. Just think about like their family is tied into it, right? Their culture is tied into it. What they do on the weekends is tied into it. Their friend group, like all those things. If you tried to divorce them from that, they would have to give all those things up, or so they think, at least. And so it makes sense that you're going to get really angry responses from people. But that's why it's so important to approach it in such a way that is disarming, where you're sort of simultaneously prodding them and acknowledging their and respecting their humanity and their perspective and saying, look, I'm not here to fight you. I'm not here to make you feel bad. I'm curious. I'm honestly just curious about how this works because I don't understand. And coming from that perspective is way more helpful and fruitful, and you'll learn way more. That's the other thing. It's just thinking you already know. Angry atheists.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would be described as an atheist, right? Like I don't believe in God, but I'm
Yeah.
not one of those angry militant atheists who's constantly like trying to fight people who believe stuff, that I don't. I'll talk with them about it. I'll break it down, and I do think those things are silly or whatever, but there's still a person there, right? And I have to
Mm-hmm.
respect that, even if I don't respect the things they believe or the things they say or do. I have to respect the fact that they're a human being. They have unconditional respect from me just by dint of being a person. And that's never going to go away no matter what it is that they believe or they do.
Why do you think that some people are more attached to those kind of identity makers than others? Because
Mm.
I know that for me, it's less of an issue than I know that it is for some. So I'm curious
Mm-hmm.
if you have some thoughts on that.
Why people are attached to those things in that way?
Yeah.
Uh, because it works, probably. like I imagine that in high school, if I fit in with the other Spanish speaking kids, right? There was a
Hmm.
crew of kids who spoke Spanish. and I tried my best to sort of hang with them because, hey, we're all the same. But we weren't. We weren't the same. I was listening to different music. I dressed differently. I talked differently. I did different things for fun. I just didn't vibe with them. But I imagine that if I could graft myself successfully, that that would have become a part of my identity in the sense that this was like in middle school and high school, right? Where you're building yourself, you're creating whatever your self conception is. If that's a giant building block to it, that's going to be a really hard thing to pull out later on
Mhm.
because you've constructed everything on top of it. I didn't have that luxury, so I couldn't do that. I tried all kinds of things. Then I tried the anti-identity where I'm like, well, I don't fit in anywhere, so I'm the kid who doesn't fit in anywhere, and that's who I am. And then that becomes its own sort of thing. But then that doesn't work either because then you're just rejecting things constantly. So it was tough. It was rough. And I imagine that for people for whom it works, they just go, yeah, this is who I am. Why on earth would I abandon this? It makes me feel comfortable and I belong somewhere. I exist somewhere. And I don't have to do all this work about trying to figure out who the hell I am. And that's why I think I'm completely just uh, speculating, but that's why I think people wake up when they're like 40 or 45 or something and they're like, I have no idea who I am, what I want, what my life is about, because they've just kind of been going through the motions and they've successfully grafted themselves onto these sort of prepackaged personalities. That's an oversimplification, of course, but I feel like that's kind of what's going
That seems to make actually some sense, and I can sort of relate to
on.
that. No, because I'm thinking about it. There is there's kind of an outsider aspect to some people and not so much to others. And I know for me, because I'm an immigrant and moved around a lot and had a very hard time fitting in. So I was never able to be really part of any in group. I tried, I wanted to be, I just
Yeah, me
never
too.
could make it. Yeah. So I think so it kind of makes sense in a way because I was never able to take on any of those identities. So it
Mm-hmm.
makes sense that I would maybe be a perpetual outsider. It wasn't even like a choice. So so I
Yeah,
can't,
same.
it's not even taking credit of it or any kind of
Yeah,
pride or anything like that.
right.
Um,
Yeah,
but then
same.
you're kind of seeing things differently.
I tried to play sports. I sucked at sports. I tried
Me too.
to, I tried to be like the super smart kid who was in all the honors classes and stuff. Not gonna happen. Uh, I tried, I tried everything, and then I was like, well, I'm pretty good at music. I play music. I can be in bands, and okay, cool. This is where I belong. But I don't really belong there either because I don't drink. I don't smoke. Partying and all that stuff was not my thing. That's what everyone wanted to do. And so I still didn't fit in, even within this circle where I sort of fit in, right? Like I had the skill set
Yeah.
and it was enjoyable, but the peer group was different. And it was like they were trying to do something different. They were trying to do something I wasn't doing. And so it always boils down to me to the principle of the thing, right? Like I don't care about that, quote unquote rock and roll lifestyle type stuff, the cliches and all that stuff. Like I don't dress like that. I don't wear studs and boots and I don't do that. I just play music because I care about music. I love music and I just play it. Right? It's heavy metal or funk or whatever I'm doing. I just love it and I do it for its own sake, not because it makes me belong somewhere. But a lot of people don't really do that. A lot of people it's backwards. They do it because it makes them belong somewhere. And I never belonged even though I tried. So I just kind of figured out, well, I might as well just enjoy the thing I'm doing, you
That's
know?
kind of where I've arrived as well. So
Yeah.
I realized that there's no fitting in. I just couldn't do it. So that I was like,
Right.
okay. And then the
Right.
friends that I had were just kind of random friends that I got that were okay
Yeah.
to, yeah, there's no rhyme or reason to. I just got along with them and they don't necessarily fit in with each other. But
Right. Yeah.
so can I get a
Those are
musical preview?
uh oh no, I don't have anything I could plug in right now.
Dar. Okay.
But but yeah, no, and I think that actually benefited me. It was very difficult in the beginning, especially, as I was when I was young, because it's lonely, it's hard. Growing up sucks, right? So
Hmm.
making it harder is just brutal, but it was harder because I didn't have those things that I could kind of lean on. But now, I have this amazing group of friends where we see each other for just who we are, and we're different and we don't agree on everything, but we just have this sort of kinship that comes from cutting away all those other things, all those superficial things, all those things that, oh, we're supposed to be friends because we both do this stuff. It's not because of that. It's just we have this human level connection with each other. And that's why I have friends that I've been friends with for like 30 years at this point. And all my new friends kind of come from this space of we're all just trying to think and we're all just trying to understand. And um, I don't know what's going on. You don't know what's going on. We're trying to figure it out together. And I appreciate your perspective. And I really like the tension of disagreeing with you. And it just comes from these sort of ground principles rather than, back in the day, your mom would just shove you in some kid's room and go, hey, you guys are both 10. Like, that's, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? I don't know if that ever happened to you. It happened to me a lot. And
Yeah.
I don't know this kid. I have nothing in common with this kid, but we're 10, so we're supposed to hang out. It's just kind of
That's what families are like too.
exactly, yeah.
You're like, you're family, you're supposed to get along. I'm like, I hate you. No, I'm kidding. If you're a family member watching this right now, I don't hate you. So, and you mentioned earlier that, it's kind of about the boxes. It's interesting because I think this is also something that relates to this, uh, because we were really, as a society, moving away, I thought, from putting people in boxes. And now we're like shoving people in
Yeah.
boxes and categorizing. And I mean, I get that, like, something about human nature that we want to label people, but at the same time, why do we have to label people so much instead of sort of allowing people to exist and learning how to just accept people as they are,
Mm-hmm.
and just be you,
Mm-hmm.
teach kids or whatnot to just be accepting of people as they are, come as you are. But there is
Yeah.
this move towards, we must label everything. We must put you in a box. We must categorize you, whether you want it or not. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you must self-identify now almost.
Yeah. It's I wonder if it's information overload. I wonder if that's what it is. Because you know how we make, I don't know, however, some crazy number of decisions every day, but most of them are just unconscious. And that there are just things we sort of accept, like our brain just creates shortcuts, right? And we're not thinking, oh, I need to pick up this bottle and drink from it. Like you just do it. There's all those things that happen involuntarily. And if your brain had to process having to do each and everything consciously every day, all day, your brain would just fry within, just a couple of hours, right? So there's a lot that just gets automated in your brain. I feel like we're having a similar problem because we now have 24-hour news cycles and different news channels that are all 24 hours, and we have social media, and there's just floods of information and people and interactions and engagement. There's no way to keep all that stuff straight. There's no way to deal with it in any kind of healthy fashion, right? And so your brain just goes, we need shortcuts. So all these people go here, all these people go here, all these people believe this, we don't like them, all these people believe this, we like them. And it just, I don't know. I wonder if it's just that. I wonder if it's just
Hmm.
everyone's brain is just overloaded and they're just creating mental shortcuts because it's easier. I mean, that's what stereotyping is. And it's like some kind of universalized form of stereotyping. Everyone is just kind of going, I need to make sense of this so that I can have a sandwich and watch TV and not be losing myself. I wonder if it's that. I don't know.
I haven't thought of it that way. I don't know.
Neither have I. That just occurred to me.
Huh.
It just
Okay.
occurred to me.
See, it's
Yeah.
an exclusive on this podcast only.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Because
I
it's
mean,
exhausting.
maybe there is something to
Yeah.
that. I think there's
Yeah.
something to that. I think
And we also
also,
just have a human tendency to categorize, right? We have a human tendency to just go, oh, all of these things are like this. So that has gone haywire now. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I did a social experiment one time, like back in the old Clubhouse days. I don't know if you used that app. Oh yeah, I
I
think you
did.
did. Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think you and I spoke
we
on
ta- we
Clubhouse.
we did. We spoke on Clubhouse. Yeah. So back in the Clubhouse days, I used to do these little social experiments. What if? So I imagine like everybody looked exactly the same, dressed the same. Like what would happen? What would the world look like? And what
Oof.
was interesting is when people sort of imagined that. Uh, there would still be division. People would still sort of divide themselves and figure out how to create little
Mm-hmm.
tribes and divide and so maybe that's what's going on. Maybe there is some kind of a human affinity for doing that. Like people are
Mm-hmm.
incapable of sort of having that, of not doing that, of not labeling,
Mm-hmm.
of not dividing themselves into little tribes. And that's maybe one way to divide themselves into these little
Yeah.
tribes by categorizing each other and
Mm-hmm.
themselves. Um,
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Like, it's just, they'll find some way of even, I mean, the classic examples are like the Hutus and the Tutsis, right? Like from the vantage point of outsiders like you and I, they seem like the same people, right? They are
mhm.
the same sort of group of people, but they're like, no way, I am nothing like them. And it's this crazy warfare. I mean, yeah, there's just a thing that we feel we need to do. I mean, growing up, going to church and stuff like that, like I would just notice this is a church, one place, one little building where a couple of hundred people go every week, and they all get to know each other, and they literally every week it's the same crew of people who go to this one spot because it's near their house, right? So they're neighbors, they're community members, and they all go to this one church. So they clearly believe, at least generally speaking, the same things about this particular topic. But even there, they're factionalizing and like, oh, we don't talk to them because blah blah blah. Within the same church, where it's like, so it's just a thing that people do. They have to find some way to categorize. It's an impulse that we have that if we don't check, it can go, yeah, it can go in a lot of really bad directions.
It's like I hate it, but I don't know if it's solvable. So I will say it
Yeah.
can be at least somewhat reversed, just because we know that it wasn't quite as scalable on such a large
Mm-hmm.
scale as it is now. So we know that
Mm-hmm.
at the very least it can be scaled back a little.
I think so. I mean, I
Yeah.
think there are like healthy-ish ways of doing it, right? Like, oh, you're a Yankee fan, I'm a Mets fan. Like, okay, we don't like
Yeah.
each other, ha ha ha. But not really, right? Like, I'm not. There are some people who actually take it to this extreme, but like, I'm not gonna fight you over that, right? Or like, you're a
Hmm.
Marvel fan, I'm a DC fan. I'm not gonna fight you over that, right? Like, we can make fun of each other, and it's kind of a game that we've all bought into. Excuse me.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to escalate to the point of like, no, I actually hate you because you prefer Spider-Man. Like, that's crazy.
Right.
But
Yeah. And I think some of it is also people wanting to feel special. So that's the thing,
yeah.
is like, what is it behind that drive to want to feel special? What is it that people are
Mm,
missing? Uh, and what is it that society sort of telling them that they're not getting or are getting
yeah.
too much of, that is causing them to feel like the need to almost sometimes invent categories or find categories, or feel like they need to be
Yeah.
sharing their category, like maybe they genuinely have one,
Mm-hmm.
and but like, in the past we didn't have to uh, necessarily, be upfront about it. It could just be a private thing. But now
Yeah.
there's sort of this compulsion to put that as, that's in your bio, or that's something that's
Mm-hmm.
like such a part of your identity, as opposed to just being something that's just part of you.
Yeah.
And now it's like that's you. And
Yeah.
I think there is something about it that is about attention or uniqueness, and
Yeah.
maybe there's another way to get that, or there's
Mm-hmm.
something that's missing, and maybe
I
if we
think
figure
it's
that out.
I think it's a crisis of meaning. Like, I'm reminded of this scene in Fight Club where
Hmm.
Brad Pitt's giving this speech, right? And he's like, we've all been raised to believe that we're going to grow up to be movie gods and rock stars. And and all that stuff, but we aren't. And we're a, what does he say? Like, we're a generation of, we're like an orphan generation. We have no great war, we have no great depression. Our great war is a spiritual war, and our great depression is ourselves. Like it was speaking to the kind of crisis of meaning. All these, guys
Yeah.
who feel like they have no purpose, they have no sense of self, they have no drive to do anything because nothing feels meaningful to them, and they end up in Fight Club, and they end up being these, like, like jarheads for this psycho, which nobody gets. That's the point of the movie, is that there's this is a bad way of going about solving this problem, but I think that's what it is. And I think that, for example, Jordan Peterson resonates with so many people because he's tapping into that need that so many people have for purpose and meaning, And there's Majid Nawaz, before the last couple of years, he said in his book, he said something very astute, which he was recognizing in himself why he was a jihadist in the first place, and it's because of something he called the romanticism of struggle. Right? If you're living during a war, a great war like World War II, if you're living through a Great Depression, if you're living through something that is an external crisis, your whole life and your whole purpose can be about surviving that and persevering underneath that. If those things don't exist, you have to find it somewhere else. And it's just the easiest way to find something to do is to find a thing you don't like that you can fight against. It's so much harder to try to build something that doesn't exist, that reflects a value that you have. That's just more difficult to conceptualize. It's more difficult to do. But I think that need is there, and that's why so many people go, we need to go back to church, we need to go back to religion. This is what happens when you lose religion. I disagree.
I
That's
disagree
like
as
going
well.
back to, that's like I wrote a piece about this. It was called "No, We Don't Need to Go Back to Church," and it's basically like, yes, there is this kind of hole that religion used to fill that we've tried to fill with other things, and that hasn't worked out. That's not good. But that doesn't mean we should go back to the other thing. That's like going back to your ex-girlfriend. Like, there's a reason you broke up. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It makes sense. Find somebody else. And so we need to find ways of giving people a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose that isn't destructive or self-destructive. That's hard because the destructive stuff is plentiful. There are plenty of ways you can have unhealthy ways of filling those voids.
Yeah, and I think these are fantastic points. I think both the
Mm,
fact that people do look for struggles, and because they may be lacking the great jihad or the battles, and then on the
right.
other hand, these like meanings. I think especially in a world where there is kind of this message of like you've got to be special. I mean, I grew up with that, and to a very large extent, and I wanted to be very significant, to
Mm-hmm.
have an impact. And I am very ambitious as a human, and but I think especially we're seeing that everywhere. You have this influence of culture, and you have people who've overnight seemingly have gotten famous, and you have this everywhere, whereas I think in the past there was much more of a value placed on just on an average person feeding their family, having this kind of middle class existence, just having a good family life, friends, all that stuff. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
was there was more value on that, and I think
Mm,
that changed. I think there was
maybe.
this kind of instant. You see a lot of hype, like okay, the big stars. There's the reality television, the influencers. For men, a lot of it is these like self-made guys with the flashy cars. That's always
Yeah.
like advertised, the YouTubers. So there is that cultural shift. And
Mm-hmm.
in the absence of that, because most people aren't really necessarily able to achieve that, um,
Mm-hmm.
in the absence of that, there is still that pursuit of specialness, and maybe that specialness comes from something else. And
Yeah.
so it
Right.
comes from these special categories, perhaps, at least
Maybe.
partially.
Yeah, it's true. I think we have to be careful not to overly romanticize the past because I just saw that movie Babylon, and it's in the
Oh,
1920s, and people are obsessed with being famous and becoming famous back then too. It's not.
yeah.
I think that's
Well, movie
always been the case.
stars. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think they
everyone wants
loved
to
being movie
be
stars and
special,
yeah,
but they
tycoons.
want to escape whatever their background is, and they're not like other people, and so they belong somewhere else. And I think that's a human thing, and I think that's always
Hmm.
been with us in some form. We're just seeing all these crazy manifestations of it scaled up because of the internet and all this kind of stuff. But just a real human need, and I think it comes from a misunderstanding of what special is. Like I remember having probably undiagnosed depression as a kid, like 10 years old. Like there was a lot going on in my life and I was dealing with it. I wasn't cognizant of this, but I just had these sort of feelings all the time. And I remember my friend seeing me and asking me why I seemed down. And I was just kind of saying exactly what you were just saying, which is like, I don't, what am I special? Like, what's special about me? Like, I don't understand why. What is my purpose? What's the point of me even being here, right? And I said, what can I do better than anybody else? Like, why? What is there for me, right? And he said, I remember this. He said, "You're you better than anybody else." And that seems kind of trite, but it totally hit me exactly the way it should have, which is yeah, that's true. I mean, there are other people who write, there are other people who sing, there are other people who do everything that I do, and they do it better than me. But nobody does it like me. And that's something that's true of literally everyone because everyone has that uniqueness. So, the that aphorism of everyone is special is kind of true. It's not that everyone is going to be Einstein or Mark Twain or something, but you are a unique human being and there's something particular about you that no one will be able to find anywhere else ever again in all of eternity. That exact combination of traits and your environment and all those things, and that makes it infinitely interesting. That makes you infinitely interesting. So rather than looking outward for the thing that makes you special, find it inside yourself and then just put it out. Find the thing that really moves you, find the thing that really gets you going and makes you feel passionate, and that other people seem to resonate with. There's got to be something, right? Like even if you're like a mechanic and you just fix cars and that's the thing that makes you happy, right? Everyone would just kind of go, yeah, there's billions of mechanics. But if you find joy in doing that, then you're good, man. Like that's all the specialness you need. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too like rosy about it, but it seems to me that I've never met a single person. I've never met a single person that wasn't interesting. Even boring people are interesting to me because I'm like, Jesus Christ, how are you this boring? Like, what is going on in your head? Like, how is this? Immediately becomes a point of curiosity for me. Like, what is with this dude? Like, where where did you come from? Like there's that gif from The Office where Steve Carell's like, "Why are you the way that you are?" That's me all the time, but
It's
not in a mean
funny.
way, like in a happy way.
I always say that if I can't get an interesting hour out of even the most boring, seemingly boring person, that's my failing, not theirs.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a skill. I think you have it. That's a skill. Yeah.
Thank you. But
Hmm.
but I think the curiosity, because I think everyone has something,
Yeah.
but I might not always, spend my time with that
Yeah.
person in that
Just
particular
because,
moment. But
right. Just because they have it doesn't mean you like it. Right.
that's correct.
It might not be anything, you don't like
I have
every
other
movie. You don't like
priorities
every song.
sometimes. That's right.
Right. You don't like all music. You don't like all art. You don't like all writing. But,
Yeah.
you know, it's cool that it's there.
But speaking of boring people, but also just diversity of people,
Uh huh.
um, the thing that, it's funny because we had I've loved our conversation so far, but it's funny because our original chat was going to be
Oh,
about
that's right.
bad people. And then we never
Yeah.
really, because
Well,
I loved,
Yeah,
We're
we
kind
kind
of
of
heading
touched on
there
it. We
a
kind of
little
touched
bit.
on it a little bit. Yeah. So basically, my forbidden topic is, and the thing that people don't agree with me on is that I don't believe in bad people. There's no such thing. And I get the shorthand. I get what people mean when they say, a guy who kills his wife, that's a bad guy. I get that, right? But um, so to speak. But the thing is that I think we should be mindful of how we conceptualize those things. So we say something like, this person is a garbage human being. You know, uh, there are moral judgments that come with that I believe we have no right to have. What we should do is say that's bad, right? That's harmful. We can't allow it. It's definitely something we need to do something about. We need to prevent it if we can, and anyone who does it needs to be put away. But that person is also a victim of circumstance in profound ways. And this is where I get on my Sam Harris thing of no free will and all that stuff. But you don't even have to get into that. You don't even have to accept the no free will thing, blah blah blah. You don't have to. All
I
you need to do is
don't.
understand. Yeah, all you need to do is understand that everyone comes from their everyone you meet, everyone you see, they are the product of their experiences, their educations, their upbringings, their friend groups, their people who influence them, the things that happen to them, all of those things which they didn't really choose or control, right? They didn't choose where they were born or who they were born to. They didn't choose, what school they went to and the things that were taught to them, right? They just kind of went through things, and whatever happened between them and their peers, whatever happened with their friends, breakups, all these things feed into their who they are, their psyche, along with their temperament, right? The things that they were just kind of born with that, unless you're a blank slatist, you understand that people are sort of born with certain tendencies and proclivities, brain
Yeah.
chemistry, whatever you want to call it. Those things together create who you are right now. Your experience plus your environment, your environment and your genetics. Uh, and if you recognize that if you lived that other guy's life all the way up to the moment where he killed his wife, you would also kill your wife. And that's a hard thing for people to wrap their heads around, but it's just, in my view, it's just a fact, right? If you were them, you'd be them and you would have done exactly what they did. And it doesn't mean that it's not wrong. It doesn't mean that it's not bad. It doesn't mean that we don't put them in jail, right? But it just changes the way that you look at them. You just go, this poor guy, something happened to him. Something happened to this guy that led him to this point, and it's terrible. And so it just gives me a sense of compassion for these people, even when I'm opposing them, even when I'm trying to stop them from doing harmful things. So the things they do are bad, the ideas they believe are bad, but I will not attribute evil to them as like this core concept or this core characteristic, because, well, what about me? Right? Am I good? And if I am, how did I become good? I decided to be good. Well, what made me decide to be good? Like, why did I choose good instead of not good? What was the thing compelling me? And how did I pick that thing? Where did that thing come from? It's a temperament. It's an influence that I got from people who guided me and people who taught me. And maybe this guy didn't have those things. So I don't know where. It's kind of like how Bernie Sanders always says, like, billionaires, blah blah blah, billionaires.
Hmm.
I'm like, at what point does Bernie Sanders's antipathy towards these people begin? Like, what if they have 999,999,999 dollars? Does Bernie Sanders hate them?
Then they're fine. Yeah, they're
But it's just
fine.
that $1. You know what I'm
It's the
saying? So
dollar. Yeah.
it's the same sort of thing. Whereas, like, it's kind of fuzzy. Like, where does this person become suddenly someone who gets to completely build themselves out of nothing? I don't think that ever happens. People are just the products of all those things. Um,
Can you be
so
born bad?
yeah, like, well, they're born that and then made that because of their experiences, whatever they're taught or not taught, whatever, if they're abused, if they have a hard time growing up, whatever it is, influences who they are. That's gonna, that's kind of like bumpers, kind of just like leading them in one direction or another. So it's complicated, but overall, it's basically just this thing of, I don't find the concept of bad people to be helpful in any real way, in any meaningful way. I see it
Yeah.
as I see it as a way for you to unjustifiably judge people and have a sense of self-righteousness. Because I made all the right decisions and I'm better than them because of it. But you have to think back to like why you made those decisions. What gave you the capacity to make those decisions? And you can't really account for those things. So there's a sense of humility that I've developed from recognizing this, and then a sense of compassion that I have for others, even people who I absolutely oppose and, you know, need to be locked up and all that kind of stuff. Uh, so it's a way of being. It's not really. It wouldn't change much in terms of how you interact or anything like that. In terms of like criminal behavior needs to be punished, etc., because we can't let that just keep happening.
Yeah.
But the reason for it changes, right? The reason for it, like this person isn't getting locked up because they're a bad person and they need to suffer. They're getting locked up because they're a danger to others, and we need to just remove that because it's not good to let people harm other people, right? But that person, if we can rehabilitate them, imagine there's another Sam Harris thing of like if we can give them a pill that cures their psychopathy, it would be immoral not to give it to them, right? Like, because it just becomes at that point like almost like a disease. They have the disease of being way too violent or whatever, right? And it's just something you can fix. If it just becomes something you can fix, why wouldn't we do that? It would make no sense to say, no, we need to put them in jail so they suffer for the things they've done, when all we need to do is just fix that thing that's wrong, right? We can't do that right now, but we can try to rehabilitate. We could try to understand the psyche and all that kind of stuff and just approach it in a more humanist sort of way where the point is not retributive. The point is not righteous judgment. The point is making things better for as many people as possible.
So I think I've arrived at a somewhat similar point, though it's difficult to not have my emotions sometimes overshadow because I do
Mm-hmm.
have a strong emotional. So, for example, something like a pedophile who hasn't
Yeah.
acted on their intentions, or a psychopath, because these are things that people are born with,
Yeah.
and those are very horrible and emotional things. It's hard to
Yeah.
overlook that, right? But if you kind of break it down in a more logical, unemotional way, you realize, okay, yeah, these people have a really ultimately a mental, or like a disorder, a disease that they cannot
Mm-hmm.
control, that happen, right? They're But I do think they can control their choices to some, maybe not a psychopath or like a killer,
Yeah.
um, but where I do struggle more. I mean, I struggle with this too, but because my human emotion,
It's
my
hard. Yeah.
guttural self, does
Mm-hmm.
have this like vengefulness and all that stuff comes up.
Yeah.
But I've been working on it, and
It's
then
hard.
yeah, and I also have a similar view of like in terms of prisons and things like that, where it's like what is most useful for the person and what's most useful for society, and both have
Mm-hmm.
to be taken into account. So you want to protect society from the person, and you
Right.
also and you want to deter crime, but also you also want to make sure that if the person gets out, like, do you want them to recommit, or do you want them to have a chance of actually becoming a part of society who's useful and can contribute?
Mm-hmm.
But where it is more cloudy for me, I guess, is because I do, I guess the personal responsibility part is more heavily weighted in my
Mm-hmm.
worldview, and I guess this is where we have a difference, and I differ from, I think I debated him slightly, Sam Harris, back in the Clubhouse days on free
Oh, did
will.
you?
Yeah, because I do believe in free will, and this is where I think we come at a bit of a crossroads, because
Mm-hmm.
I do think that there's a lot of influence. I think, yes, you're born with a certain temperament, you have a certain the experiences that you have shape you, and there's a lot to what you say that absolutely makes sense. And I
Hmm.
still think there's a level of personal responsibility to take. You can take
There is.
two people have had a similar life, and yet one can make a choice that's a more, let's say, self-sacrificing one to do the right thing, and the other one will look out for themselves. And I guess you could argue that it is because the other one's temperament is a slightly different. You could make that
Yeah.
argument, and I don't know how you go about proving one way or the other, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that's the
Yeah.
thing, it's not provable, and therefore I don't concern myself that much with the argument.
Yeah.
All like I think where I'm at is really like, okay, I would rather live my life as if I have free will than if I do
Hmm.
not. I think that's where I was making my point when I
Yeah.
talked to Sam. But
Yeah.
um
It's an incoherent concept generally, but like so that scenario that you put forth, where two people are kind of at the same crossroads and they make different decisions, it still matters, right? Whether settle we can settle the argument or not about whether they have free will or not. What they do matters because it affects the world and it affects people around them, and that matters because conscious experience is really the only thing we can graft meaning to, right? Like whatever, the meaning of life, all that stuff, it
mhm.
has to boil down to like conscious experience. Like that's the point. The point is, what is my conscious experience going to be like, right? That's what
So I'm
ethics
going to
are.
judge that person. I am going to be mad
Well,
at that person.
right. So that's one avenue you can take, right? Or
Yes.
you could take a different avenue, which is what I would recommend, which is to say what he did was wrong. I'm going to figure out how to make it so that we incentivize against people doing that because it is harmful to him or to other people. And that's the only thing I really care about. I don't care about, getting back at this guy, making him feel bad. Like, if making him feel bad in terms of like, scolding him or some stuff like that, or even like prison time, right? If that is part of the incentivizing thing and we just know that that calculus works, and it's not a situation that we currently have where people leave jail worse than they entered because of how jail is, or how prison is. If imagine we figured that stuff out, and all we're doing is kind of tweaking the dials and just figuring out the perfect combination of incentives to get people to do what we all agree is best. Great, right? But there's no reason for the self-righteous judgment. There's no reason for any of that sort of condescension or moral superiority. That stuff just isn't useful. It's corrosive because it disconnects you from these people. It makes you feel as though that couldn't be you, but in a real sense, it would be you. There's
Well, what you
there's
said, useful. That word "useful"
yeah.
is a key word, because I wrote a Substack on that too. Is that, what's
Mm,
useful, and I think I try to let that guide me. But that's different from my emotional outburst of a
of course,
response.
right, right. But
Yeah.
that gets back to what we were talking about earlier about you have the emotion, but then you have to kind of go, okay, hold on a
Yes.
second, let's tamp that down and figure out what's actually best here, because
Yeah.
what you initially feel is not always the best thing to do, right?
Correct.
Uh, the other example, and I think maybe Sam Harris even talked about this too. But you can see this series of photos of these men and women. They're young, they're good looking, and they're having a picnic or they're out at a carnival, and it's just these beautiful photos, right? They're black and white photos, and then you realize all these people work at Auschwitz. All these people that you're looking at having a great time, they're having fun in the sun and picnics and all this crazy stuff that seems so normal and beautiful stuff that you would love to participate in. That was on their day off from Auschwitz. And the point of that is not to say that what they did at Auschwitz was okay, right? It's not. The point is to say these are people. They're still normal people. And they're in this circumstance where somehow they're compartmentalizing, or somehow they've figured out a way to justify the horrific things that they're doing, and they still go and do this like normal stuff, right? It's like it's those are humans. Those aren't monsters. Those are people. And they're people just like you. And the hardest thing for people to accept is that that could be me, but it really could. It really could. You're lucky that you aren't. That's really all it is. That's how I see it. So that allows me to be humble, or to try, and it allows me to be compassionate or to try with other people, and that's what gives me so much patience, I think, when I'm talking to people who are incredibly hostile, you know.
That's a really important thing to remember. And I think another reason why it's important to remember that it could be you
Hmm.
or someone else is because um, it allows us to watch out for things. Because if
Exactly.
we think we can't fall for anything, then we might.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's yeah, it's tough. Being is tough, right? Just being is tough. But that's also why I think we should insist on communicating with each other and connecting with one another, because we need help with this. Life is hard, man. We should help each other out as much as we can. Keep things open as much as we can. Bigotry and that kind of stuff is almost, it's like a privilege. It's like a luxury, right? It's saying I can cut out this entire group of people and never interact with them or connect with them or learn from them or any of that because I have enough. I can learn and connect with other people. There's enough people. But that sort of falls apart, when you realize, oh, but then I'm going to cut off these people and then I'm going to cut off these people. And you keep using that mechanism, you end up by yourself. And then what? I don't have that privilege. I want as many people as possible to connect with and talk to and learn from, because there's so little time, and there's so much I don't know and so much I don't understand and so much I want to be better at. I'm going to outsource all of that. I'm not going to do all that work by myself. I'm going to get people to help me out. So that's my motivation, really.
Well, on that note, I really
Mm.
enjoyed connecting with you and learning from you and getting a little bit of wisdom from you and getting a
Oh,
little bit of a challenge to my own thoughts from you, which I appreciate. Even though we agree on a lot, there's a little bit of things that you've left me to ponder and rethink, which I appreciate, because I think that's
oh, good.
always a gift. So and I
Likewise.
look forward to getting some more of that. So
Yeah,
thank
me
you.
too. Me too. Thank you. I appreciate what you do as well.
Thank you so
I'm always
much.
ready for your next piece and see what you're up to on Twitter. So thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.